Uh-huh, No, it's really come together. The bridge is sounding great. It's exactly what I wanted. Everything feels really fluid and good. What's the next step? I just don't know where to go from here. Yeah, studio. Let's hit the studio. It's recording time. Let's have a think about that.
Hello and welcome to the 145 World Podcast, where we are here to strengthen music careers and communities one song at a time. And now here's your host, Jacob Wing. Yay!
And welcome everybody to today's episode. We got a pretty good one today, so really excited about that. Today we are hitting upon where do you get to that point? You've done all the work and everything's feeling really good. You've got one song all the way done or a couple that are feeling really great. And it's time to go record or it's time to hire a studio and go get things done. So today we're going to go through all the steps, all those kind of things that will help. First thing we're going to do is just talk about the pros and cons of doing it yourself or hiring somebody else. And then we'll move on to some skills you can refine and work on before you go into the studio. After that, we're going to talk about prep. And then we'll talk about a couple things that are okay to wait and save and to polish up and finish in the studio while you're there. And then number 5, we'll just give you 5 keys to success while you're in the studio and doing some recording. So let's get started. All right, first things first, we're going to talk about the benefits of recording yourself versus hiring a producer or an engineer and going to a studio. Everything has its own benefits. Everything has its own cost and cons. So the real important thing to talk about here, first and foremost, is what's important to you and what resources you want to spend or invest into things. So when it comes to doing the recording, especially earlier in your career and when you're first getting your start, you don't have a lot of money to work with, but what you do have is a lot of time. And a lot of resources if you count what's on the internet and what's available to you in that way, just what you can pull up at your fingertips. So versus a studio and engineer, the first things you got to think about and the benefits of doing it this way and recording yourself is you have all the time in the world. So that's number 1. You can take as long as you want to learn the techniques you need to do to get the proper recordings, to make the mistakes and go back and redo anything you need to or do it as many times as you want. And that in itself is just a huge win, especially when you're beginning. There's no pressure behind you. There's nothing to force you into getting anything done. When it comes to working with a studio, time does equal money in that route. So this is a great way to avoid that and losing any of your money that way. Not that I'm saying it's a waste of money, but it does pay for itself. But when you're first starting out, there's a lot that you don't know, so it's really easy to get ripped off and to just watch that money drain away and not get the product that you wanted because you weren't sure what to ask for, what to be looking for, if they're wasting your time and taking too long, those kind of things. So time is really on your side when you start out doing it yourself. Another thing to think about is the time that you actually do put into this and put the effort in. And like I said, you're pulling up those things, you're learning tutorials, you're doing the hands-on thing where this works and this does not work. Oh crap, I made a big mistake and I got to redo this. I got to go back to step so-and-so just because, I clipped this audio or it didn't sound that good. And my gains, I just learned what gain staging was. Oh crap. But the point about all that is that as you're investing this time and putting in that effort, you're also gaining a bunch of knowledge that you can pull on for the rest of your career. And as I was saying before, is if you're going into the studio and you've hired a studio or an engineer and a producer, once you know what needs to be done and the steps that they have to go through to achieve the sounds that, set you apart, you can really hold their feet to the fire as needed, since you're investing your time and all your effort and money into this and really use your knowledge base to say, hey, I feel like this should be going faster or hey, is this really the best way to go about this? Or am I paying for this extra time? Those kind of things. You don't want to be a jerk about everything, but you just want to make sure, just like in everything else, you're getting the best bang for your buck, and everybody's on the same page as that gets done. So the next thing to really talk about, of course, and it's said about 7 or 8 times in there, is just the money. In the end, if you are doing it yourself, you really are saving a ton of money from going into a studio, and money that you just don't think that you have yet until you've got a product that you think is good enough to invest in something like that. And just do it yourself for the first couple times. It's not a big deal. You don't even have to release it. Just share with friends and family. Get some critiques. Get some I like this, I don't like that kind of thing. And especially you'll know in your own head, this worked really well this time, and I really like that. I want to continue going down that route. Or this wasn't that great. Maybe I should do a little bit more research, or pick out a sound I like and figure out who engineered this or how it was done, how the sound was achieved, and you can go that route. That's a great route too. But those are the three big keys of yourself, the benefits of recording yourself versus going to a studio. The cons, of course, are going to be what the pros are for the studio. So the pros of going to a studio, first and foremost, are equipment. And studios invest a crap ton of money into making sure that they can get the best sounds, the highest quality recordings. They've thought about things that you can't even begin to fathom, and invested money to make that sound better. The less that you have to deal with that, the more that you get to focus on what's important, the creativity and the overall story you're trying to tell with your music and your brand. And so having other people that have invested their money, that makes a huge difference. Another thing that a studio really helps with is that having an outside influence or another ear on a project can really add so much. Working together with anybody else that can, hold you to accountability, that, maybe you're not getting the best performance you could, or maybe you started that day recording and you just didn't have the best mindset, and you've got that tunnel vision of this is what's going to get done. But having the outside ear of, hey, what if we, played this part a little bit lighter and did a little bit, use some dynamics in this area, or, throw out ideas like that you just hadn't even thought of. And then you start, those little things add up over the course of a song and over the course of an EP or an album, and they really do make a difference. So having an outside ear is a huge win. Another thing that a lot of people don't think about is we talked about time being on your side and you don't have that pressure behind you. Well, the difference is that when you put your money on the table and you step into that studio and you're performing in front of other people, either other musicians, your bandmates, hired studio musicians, and engineers that have been doing this for years and years, you start to feel that pressure of a performance, just like anything else. You go out to play your best live show. I'm sure a lot of people can attest to you, and you could probably attest to yourself. Some of your best performances, some of your best moments is because you had those butterflies and you had to step up to the moment. Boy, when you step up to that moment, there's just nothing like that. So having other people in the room while you're doing this gives you that little boost, that hurdle to overcome, that bar to climb up on. And that's a huge win, something you don't get when you work alone. And then the other quick thing I just want to talk about on that, with in a studio, especially if you're talking about more than one song and you're going to release these as a group of songs, something that you don't consider when you're doing it by yourself is that there are hundreds upon hundreds of steps that go into producing, writing, and recording any song. And it's really easy to get different sounds after everything's said and done because a process wasn't followed, or steps were done out of order in one song and versus the other, and you don't know a lot about maybe mastering and how to get things to the same level, the same tone, the same feel. Consistency is a huge thing. So using a studio and outside influence for that, it's much easier to get get a more consistent product with that kind of thing. So that's a huge win there. So that's just the pros and cons to think about recording yourself versus pulling in a producer and an engineer in a studio and doing that way. Both ways have their benefits. It's a win-win situation as long as you're creating music and getting it out there. That's the most important part. But let's move on to the next thing I wanted to go over here. And this is recording skills. So these are the things that you can do before you step into a studio and start recording, either be it your own before you sit down and say, I'm ready to start, let's get this done. Or if you're going to step into a studio and pay money, these are the things that you should probably have worked out. And this is just from personal experience, and especially from having clients and musicians come in that hadn't either thought about these kind of things or, just hadn't it was their first time, and things that they've ran into that were a little bit tough. So we're going to talk about the things that you can hone at home, in your bedroom, in your practice space, in your studio, so that you don't have to deal with that kind of thing. The next thing, as we're talking about these recording skills, the first thing that you almost never really think about unless you've been in the studio before is playing to a click track. So if you've been doing your rehearsing and your writing and all that kind of stuff, and you haven't been using a metronome and you've never played to a click track, this is something you need to really consider and invest a little bit of your practice time and your personal time into making this better. If you have any kind of phone or anything like that, you can just pull up an app for a metronome and just sit there and set it to a certain beat and just play along with that. And just make sure that when you're playing, that your changes and all the parts of the song are coming up on those beats, and making sure everything just lines up like that. A big thing that people don't think about is like, I'm just going to go, I just want to be me. I just want to sound like me. But the thing you don't consider is the second that anybody else is involved in this, if you want to do other instrumentation, if you want to play with anybody else, if you want to add drums, bass, keyboards, piano, anything else to that song, and you have anybody else involved in that, you are playing with other people, so you have to be on the same page. And playing to a click track is the way to make sure that when it comes to do that editing, when it comes to bring everything together, when they have to play over your performance, they have something to anchor to as well. So that's something you really don't think about, but it's something you can do at home and get better at. And when you step in the studio, not a big deal. Like you put on your headphones and you start hearing that click track, and boom, you're ready to go. You've heard it. You've worked with a metronome. Things are ready to go. Another thing to consider, and a thing that you can hone in your own time and in your own space, is what I call finding the sweet spot. And what I mean by that is, as a musician, you know what works for you at home. So when you're doing your writing and when you're doing your practice and when you start doing your arranging for your songs, you're doing this all in the comfort of your own area usually. And you know what works for you. You're playing on a couch, you're playing on your edge of your bed, in a chair, or you're standing up or on a stool, but you're routinely doing the same thing over and over. And then what happens is that people that go into the studio and don't know what their sweet spot or what makes them comfortable, and they change that up when they're in studio, all of a sudden everything's out of place. They get out of their head. They can't figure out why it's not the same. Why doesn't it feel right? I could do this earlier. I know I can do this. I've proven I can do this. And then they're already inside their head, and the performance is never quite what they want it to be. But a great way to avoid that is just to know what makes you comfortable. And, if it's your own place, you're doing your recording, you know how to replicate that in your own place. You have everything, so that's not a problem. If you're going to a studio and you're working with other people, just be honest and open about what works for you. Hey, I need a chair, and I just like to sit at this angle, and this is what works for me. And I guarantee you, any engineer, any producer can make that work. Especially if they're miking up so like an acoustic or anything like that, or just, they will find a way once you're comfortable to make those things work around you. So just know what that is, and then you're half the battle's already won right there. Another thing to bring in is what I called finished ears, and that is just you knowing when something is good enough. So a lot of the times, especially if you're working with outside influences and stepping into the studio for the first time, you're bringing a song that they probably have only either heard clips of, that you've played online or released in a social media form, or you played for them a little bit before you decided to bring them on and hire them. but they don't know it anywhere near as well as you do. So you are the one that has to know that when you're recording that part, if like say if you're just working on the verse part of the song and you're recording it, you're playing it for them, you're the one that has to know if they play it back for you, yes, that's good enough, that's exactly how I wanted it in my head, or no, I kind of missed a couple notes and it's going to be noticeable. I don't want that. You can't settle in that situation, and you're the one that has to make that call. Nobody's good enough to know except for you, because it's your song, it's your music. So having finished ears and knowing what that is, putting up enough rehearsal time ahead of time to make that work and to make sure you know what you know is the key to that one. Just having those finished ears. But and the one thing that you hear a lot of, especially when you're early in your recording career, is people throwing around the term, fix it in the mix. And if anybody ever says that to you, I don't want to say physically harm them, but give them a very dirty look. That should do just fine. Never, ever, 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 ever. And I cannot state this enough. Never. Look at my eyes. If you're watching this on YouTube, look me in the eyes. And if you're just on the podcast, open your ears to this one. Never, ever, ever say, I'll fix it in the mix. That's not a thing. It's never been a thing, and it never will be a thing. Yes, engineers can do a great many things, and they're years upon years upon years of talent, and all of the technology has really come along. Let's not short-sight that. But when it comes down to it, if you're saying, I'm going to fix it in the mix, I kind of messed up a couple things, my timing was a little bit off, it's okay, we'll fix it in the mix. At some point, you can only do so much. You're going to hear artifacts if you're changing around timing and sound and missed notes. And those things really add up. And they really show the difference between somebody who's a professional and a polished sound versus an amateur who just said, it's close enough. We made a big point in the last episode right before this, talking about how you don't want to have perfection paralysis and focus too long. Everything has to be perfect. But what we're saying here is that you know what's right and you know what's not right. So never just walk away and say, we'll fix it in the mix, because getting it right at the source at the time is the big win. You cannot polish a turd to be gold. It just isn't possible. So never settle for that. Another thing to think about, and a thing you can hone while you're at home, is your intonation. And it's something a lot of people don't really think about that much. I'm in tune. The tuner said I'm in tune. I spent the time to make sure that it sounds okay, but making sure that everything works together, you have to make sure that you're dead on when you're doing a recording. Especially, like I said, if you're bringing in other musicians, they have to work with you. You can adjust to it later, but if you're playing anything that's over, not single notes, that's chords, triads, anything like that, you can't go back and adjust those. That's permanent. So if you have a couple strings or what have you that are out of tune, that's really going to hinder how the final product turns out. So you just have to be aware of, this is what I sound like when I'm in tune, and this is, versus this is a little bit out of tune. I need to figure out what's working here. Let's pull up the tuner again and make sure we're okay. And it's just, there's great ways to test yourself on this. Especially if you're talking about like guitar or anything like that, the stringed instrument, make sure it's in tune. Use it, whatever the best tuner you have available. And then next, just throw a couple things out of tune and just play along and tinkle with those and see what happens. And then your ears will start to shudder, and the hairs on your arm will start to raise and go like that. So, and you're like, something's off, something don't feel right. The more that you kind of work with that and feel what's right versus what's wrong, the more you'll get that fifth sense, sixth sense, seventh sense about intonation and what's working. And the last one, of course, and this is going to be really straightforward, and you're going to say, no crap, why did you waste our time with saying that? But the other thing that you can work on at home in your practice space before you step into the studio is just be well rehearsed. Know everything front to back. If there's, parts to the song, have them down. If there's a solo or musical break part, know what it is. Know the main melody. Know how that. Don't go in and say, I'm just going to improvise. Have something ready. those are really big game changers for a session, and huge money wasters when you step in and you don't have those things all done. That can really bite you in the pocketbook there. So that really covers up the things that you can do before you step in to the studio. But let's talk about the prep work before we step into the studio. So let's break that down. The first part we're going to talk about is the songwriting prep and those things that you can have ready going into the studio for the song. And the next part is we'll go into the instrument prep. All right, let's talk about the songwriting prep. So this is going to be basically just a rundown and checklist that you can use when you have your songs ready and you think you're ready to go in the studio. This is just something you can go through real quick, and it'll kind of give you the idea of, yes, I'm ready to start recording. Yes, I'm ready to step into that studio. And if any of these things aren't ready, just take a step back, get it sorted out first. And then, once that's checked off, you're ready to go. The thing is, the more that you do this, the more that you go through these kind of systems, the easier it's going to be, and the more that you're going to not even need a checklist or anything like that. It's just going to become natural to you. But the first couple times, and especially maybe the first year to 2 years that you're starting to do these kind of things, and if you've never used it before, this is just a great starting point. This is really going to help. So the first thing on the checklist is to know the key of the song. That's super important. If you step in and you're just like, hey, what key? And you're like, I don't know. That's something that everybody's going to have to go back through later and really deal with. And it makes everything, it really drag a little bit, and it can leave a bad taste in your mouth. I know it's all just not that big of a deal, but it's so easy just to figure out what the key of your song is. If you don't know what that is, by all means, just pull up a YouTube tutorial. It'll tell you right away. Or just say, hey, here's my starting key. Usually your root is going to be in there of whatever scale it's going to be based on. So just know what key you're in. The next thing to think about is your beats per minute, and how fast how slow is the song going to be. And if you don't know that, that's totally fine. The really easy way to do that is just pull up, as we were talking about before, any kind of metronome app that you've downloaded, and just play the song a bit, get a feel for it. And then there's always a tap function with these metronomes, and just sit there and hit it 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and it's going to tell you the beats. Okay, 115 beats per minute. Write it down. You're done. That's all you need to know. As long as you're in the general area, and most engineers or most people, when they get in the studio, they're going to run through it a couple times as they're getting ready to record it, just to make sure. Hey, does this feel right? Does it feel wrong? You want to go faster? Those kind of things. But as long as you're in the ballpark, you're way ahead of the game, and you know where you're starting. So the next part we're going to talk about is know all the different sections and the different parts of your song. And this sounds really, really self-explanatory. Like, hey, you weren't ready to record, or you didn't know your parts. Why were you going in to record? But it happens all the time. People show up with a concept, and they have, a great chorus, and they know they have a couple good hooks that go over a verse part or so, and they've got some lyrics, but they haven't put everything together. And they show up, and you wind up spending half a session just putting together that song because these things weren't done. So you got to make sure that you know all the parts. Do you have the intro? Do you know how you want to begin that song? Do you know the bridge? Are you going to do a bridge? Are you going to do a breakdown? Are you going to do any solos? Is there going to be a musical break for other instruments? How are you going to do the ending? Is it going to be an outro, fade out? Do you want to ring out one great chord that just does that? And those are the kind of things that you have to have planned out and ready. You need to know those before you step in the door. So know your parts. Another big one that I see people step into the studio all the time is their lyrics aren't done. And let me be really specific here, because this can be kind of confusing, and I'm not talking down to anybody. We've all stepped into the recording or started recording without knowing what the lyrics are going to be, and they're usually the last thing to go on recording anyways, so that's not a huge deal. But you should have an idea of what the theme is, what the story is, and kind of at least part of what the chorus is going to sound like, and what words are going to be used. You should have something formed so that you know what the idea behind the song is, because that's part of its overall arching, theme and sound and everything. So you should have some part of those done. But it's one of those things, it's kind of a fine line. It's okay if you come in with not everything done, because you're going to change things when it's said and done. And that's fine, but you should have at least a concept of what's going on with those. So have some lyrics written down and know that. Another big one that I see people step into the studio or start a recording all the time, and we will do an entire episode on this. That's how important this one is. References. If you don't have references for what you want your sound to be, you are not going to get the end result you want. I promise you. And especially if you are paying somebody to come up with an end result for you and you're just throwing out ideas, or you expect it to read your mind somehow, that's absolutely idiotic. No, very bad. So you need to take some time and say, here's a sound that I like, and you need to either give them some sort of link or have one available for yourself where they can pull it up on either YouTube here or somewhere where they can reference that sound and be able to hone in what you want and compare those. I mean, it's never going to be the exact same. You have your own sound. You're unique, and that's great. But if you don't have a reference point, then you're just fishing in the dark, and nobody really understands what you want without having that kind of direction. And especially any engineer worth his money, is worth his metal, will have a reference track already on the track because they've asked you what it was. They've got a version of it. It's on the in the version of the song that you're downloading right now. Usually they have it already in the session with them. That way they can reference it as they go along. Those things really help things move really fast and get to where you need to be much faster, much quicker. And it's a huge money saver, and it's a guarantee that your sound's going to wind up closer to what you wanted versus not having that at all. So references are a huge, huge must. And the other thing that you can have ready for your songwriting prep, is a list of instruments. And that seems pretty simple, and it really is. Just know pretty dead on what you want to happen in this song. If I want piano, but I'm also going to want a little bit of violin with this, and maybe a little bit of guitar backing. Have that ready when you're sitting down to do it, or either handing that to an engineer or producer saying, these are the instruments I want with this. Let's make room for them. That way, when it comes to putting in like musical breaks or solos or that kind of thing, they know what goes where or where to leave room and how to build things in. So that's really important. So that's the songwriting prep. Let's talk about the next part of this, part 2, and that is the instrument prep. So these are really straightforward. There's only 3 of them, but I swear to God, if you step into a studio and do not do this, you are wasting time and money and putting out an inferior product because you didn't do simple steps that really are just no-brainers. First and foremost, and I really hate that I have to say this, but I have to say this. We're going to start with anything with strings. If you are going to step into a studio or start a recording with anything that has strings, you darn well better put new strings on that. And I cannot tell you how many times I've had people show up with dull strings that sound dead as the day, like dead as a night, and just, oh my gosh, my hair, I just want to pull it out. And why did you pay money to do this? It sounds dull, and there's no app and no special medicine I can put on this that's going to make this shine and sound beautiful, because you didn't just take a little bit of time. So if you have a stringed instrument, if it's a guitar, if it's a banjo, if it's a ukulele, if it's a mandolin, I don't care. If it's, oh, God forbid, if you're a bass player and you show up without new strings, I'm going to throw you out till you get some new ones. Just personal thing, but put new strings on it. And the other part of that, the other half to that, is to spend some time, break those strings in. Either play it for a day or 2 beforehand, or just do the old technique of stretch them out, play them, retune it. Stretch them out, play a little bit, retune them. If you do that 5, 6, 7 times, you're good. It's fine. But have it done before you step in the studio. Don't waste money and time without putting new strings on them. The next one is anything with batteries. If you are going to show up with anything that uses batteries, into a studio or into a recording session, please put new batteries in before you show up. Nothing will kill momentum or make you waste money as you're trying to find a replacement, or you have to run to the store because you didn't have this one part to make a tuner work, to make a pedal work, to make anything like that. If it has batteries, if you're using here's a great example. If you have an acoustic guitar that you're going to have to do a DI out of and make a direct input into for your recordings, either they're going to use it as a backup and a safety net or part of the actual sound, make sure if that's a powered, battery driven input, replace the darn battery. Don't show up and just, I've used it for a while, it's fine. You don't not know. Put a new battery in the darn thing. I mean, most studios will have batteries, but don't make them use that. Just do your diligence. And last but not least, we'll talk about anything that has multiple sounds or has different values to it. And with that, we're just talking about, like, if you're bringing in keyboards or synthesizers or anything like that, write down what the settings are, how to get to them quickly and instantly. Not search around. I had this great sound the other day. Let me pull that up. Even if it's programmed and you can just press a button, make sure that you have it written down somewhere how to get back there if you need to. With values, you really need to think about if you're using like pedals and you have those dialed in a certain way for a certain song, have them written down. Or if you have an amp, same thing. However you've dialed that in to make that exact tone you want, make sure that's written down. And if that's not working, the other option is just to have a photo on your phone. That's all you need. Here's the values I like. Okay, boom, 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 pull it up. Okay, all right, here's where I want the song. Just have something to reference as you get in there. So those are the 2 stages of prep. Now, for those stages of prep, like I said, that can be a little bit overwhelming, but we have taken the time to make a little checklist for you that you can pull up anytime. It's just a PDF you can download. It walks through every one of these steps so that you know what to do, and it's a interactive one. So as you go through it, you can just click on it. It'll do the checklist for you. And if that'll help you out at all, you can look at the links below down here. And there's a link right to our Patreon, and you can just click on that and download that and use it at any time. And that's completely free. So you just go to our Patreon, that link down below, and you can just download that. Hopefully that'll help you out. While you're there, if you want to join our group and become a Patreon, help us out. We'd really appreciate that. And if not, please just take it and enjoy. Do your thing. That's all that really matters. That's why it's there. We're here to help. Let's move on to the 4th part of this that I want to go over. And these are just a quick list of things that are okay to do in the studio to go in and deal with those while you're there. So the things that you don't really have to have refined going into the studio. The first one is the song arrangement. And that seems a little bit counterintuitive, but as long as you know the parts of each song, that's the really important part. But going into the studio, as you're forming the song, as you're putting it, pen to paper, as it were, sometimes you just don't know what parts are going to work well, in the beginning. But as you flesh it out, it starts to become more clear. So you start with the intro. You're not sure, do I want to do a fade in? Do I want to do just a quick rundown of the verse and then just go into the very first verse? Do I have an instrumental part going into the intro? You never really know what's going to work, but as long as you know the parts, as you're in the studio and you're putting this song together, it's an okay time to do the arrangement and finalize that, as it were. And especially when it comes to, hey, you're putting the parts together and it's starting to feel a little bit redundant. You need something different. Let's do the bridge a little bit earlier. Or, hey, we need a bit of a break here. Let's do an instrumental break. Let's bring in outside influence and kind of break up the monotony here. Or, that you could even do that with anything, especially as you're thinking about it, just anything that's going to make that song stick out versus other songs, or really bring out the most important part of the story of the song, using the arrangement. Those are things you need to think about and that you can really dial in as you're in the studio. So the next one, what we touched upon, was with the word arrangement of the lyrics and the finalization of the lyrics. Those are all things that you can zone in on at the end and just touch upon what you want. And a lot of times you go in with, you have an idea of what the lyrics are going to be, but as you've put everything together and they've, parts have moved around and you've tightened it up because it's a different tempo than you thought it was going to be. Sometimes certain words won't work just based on the amount of syllables or how it's phonetically working, and then you'll have to just move around how the lyrics work, or different words to go in different parts. So those are all okay things to work on in the studio while you're there. Another good one is instrumentation, and what I mean by that is just what instruments are going to be playing where is an okay thing to hammer out while you're working in the studio. And a good example of that is just, again, if we're talking about things are getting too monotonous and sounding just too repetitive, a good thing to do is be like, hey, we're going into the final chorus and we're going to use this chorus as an outro. In the very first part, let's do that. The first half of that chorus, let's just drop all the instruments out except for the main one, it'd be a guitar, piano. Let's just go with one and the vocal. And then, halfway through, let's bring back in everything right back in. Everybody's kind of leaned in a little closer to hear what's going on. And then boom, you're back in with everything. And this is really great. I've got all the emotion. You're feeling it. Those kind of things. Instrumentation can really be a game changer when it comes to how great a song is. And those are okay things to work out in the studio. Another ones are, you have an idea of what the song's going to be and how you want it to work, but it's okay to work on melodies when you're in the studio. You can work on variations of the melody, which is always helpful. Like I said, you're working out repetitions. You need some variation in the song. You might take the chorus and say, hey, what if we did the first two parts the same, the third we're going to do this little variation, and the fourth we're going to bring back the exact same way. Just those little change ups in the melody can be a huge game changer to making a song really unique and pop. And as far as melodies go, you can always move it through the arrangement and the instrumentation too. Take that melody that you sang for the chorus, and you can use it in the intro and one of the instruments, or you can use it as a theme in the ending, or those kind of things that you can just reuse the melody and fine tune what you want to do with that melody as you move along. And the last part I will touch upon on this one is just the harmonies. So same thing, melodies are okay to work out in the studio. And then harmonies, of course, you may not go in knowing if you want harmonies in certain spots. You might not know what kind of harmonies you want. Do you want to do a 2-part harmony, 3-part harmony? Do you want harmonies just in the chorus? Do you want to do like a third harmony, based on the scale, or a fifth? You don't really know going in, and that's okay for the most part. Most people don't know anyways. And those are the kind of things that it's okay. Like, hey, something's missing here, or we need the chorus to pop out a little bit more versus, everything else, the verse and everything else. What can we do different? Hey, let's add some harmonies here so it really feels like it's a big deal. And that's a great time to refine and work those things out. So that's just a real quick list of those. The last thing what we really want to talk about here is some keys to success in the studio. So I'm just going to give you 5 things that if you can achieve this going into the recording or into the studio, I think that you're going to, time and time again, wind up with a great product and be happy with the results. So the first thing that we'll talk about in the 5 keys to success in this situation is be adaptable, first and foremost. Nothing ever turns out the way you think, especially if you go in with a dead-on plan. If you think this is how it's going to turn out, it never does. That's not how things work. You just need to be adaptable. And I found that, especially as a musician myself, when I go into a recording thinking I've worked out this great part, I'm gonna record this, and then you get to do it and put it on paper, or you finally do a recording of it, and you start recording and it doesn't feel right, and you're adding the other parts, it doesn't feel right, so you adapt it so it sounds right. Oh, okay, now it works together. Now the pieces are fitting. Now the puzzle's starting to look clearer. Just be adaptable when you go in there. Don't go in just like a train and you're going to run over everything. The next part to that is to have patience, going in and just know that it's going to take time and mistakes are going to be made and you're going to have to do multiple things multiple times to achieve the results you want. So just have the patience to go in and be okay with making mistakes and addressing them and getting them done. Another thing about, especially when it comes to saving time and money and moving forward with the project is that third step, and that third key to success is just to commit quickly and easily. You kind of already know what the sound you want is, but just be able to make those choices, those decisions as they come up during this process, and just be okay with making quick decisions. Like, okay, yeah, this versus this could sound this way. Okay, so I want to do this. Let's just commit to it and let's move on. You don't, again, touching upon that episode just before this, if you haven't watched or seen it, it really does hit it out of the park on that part. You don't want to get perfection paralysis and just be like, I don't know, I can't commit to a sound, I can't do this. So coming in with the mindset of I'm going to commit quickly and easily is a great thing to do. And number 4 on our 5 keys to success, as we talked about before, is having references or a vision. And that just comes down to knowing what you want your in sound to be and what you want this project to end up as. And having references makes that happen and makes everything clearer and easier. So that's step number 4. And step number 5, and the last step in the keys to success, is just open communication, especially if you're working with anybody else in this entire process. Having being willing to talk and figure things out and be open about things will make this so much easier. The first step to having that open communication is in you, where you have to check your ego. And we all have an ego. We all have a way we want things done, the way we think they should be. But you have to check that at the door, or you're going to run into problems and you're not going to get the results you want. And it's really, really important that you, as we're doing this, we're friendly about everything. You want to be, a good person to work with, but you also, with that in mind, don't want to be timid. So this is not the time when you're doing recording and working with other people. You're paying for a product. You do not want to be timid. You want to be straightforward. Hey, I don't have enough of this. This mix isn't working in my ears. I need to hear something. I need to hear more myself, less background. Those kind of things, being open and honest and not being timid about that is really important. Another example is that being straightforward with what works and what doesn't. Hey, I'm not happy with this result. Just say it. Find a friendly way to say, okay, that's not what I wanted. I'm looking for this sound. It's not right. So if they ask you, is this right? Just say no. And then, of course, the other one is just if something's out of tune or isn't sounding right, just stop and redo it. Being open and honest. Hey, this isn't sounding right. Something's off. Can we figure out what part isn't working here? And let's address that and move forward. Just having those lines of open communication, being okay to talk and say things, that's important. But as we move on, I really want to thank everybody. That's really all I have for this one. Like I said, down below, there's that checklist. That's a great tool to use. Please, by all means, go pick it up. It's free. Just use it. If you enjoyed this, please leave us a like and a subscribe. Our numbers are starting to grow, so we're really, really happy about that. And we'd love for you to join us, and it really does help. And that's really about it for today. So thank you all so much. If you ever need any help with any of your recordings or you're running into problems, we're always available. And please join our Patreon, and we'll see you all later. Thank you guys so much. Bye.